So, welcome to the Soul Driven podcast. Today, I have a very special guest, and it's David Cates, who I have known for about 5 years now. And David is a pioneer in many ways in the field of relating, sexuality, traumas, and how to connect all of that. And I would say in how you are viewing life and death. And yeah, I will let you introduce yourself more, but I'm just really honored to have you here. And I feel like you are this grandfather of wisdom, and you have so much to give. And whenever you talk about something, there's always something new that opens for me. So I'm just very curious to see what will open in this conversation today.
Hmm. Yes, thank you. Me too. Me too. Because I know that the quality of conversation depends on, um, yeah, the circulation, the listening, and the speaking between two people. And I know that you and I have been able to dive deeply into some waters that other people, yeah, it's more difficult for them sometimes. So I feel like what you said about me with the depth of the elder, I feel like you carry that also. And so to have a little fireside chat with two elders about these topics is super exciting to me. It's like I don't have to convince anyone that they're going to die. Like we both know what's coming. And that makes for a beautiful beginning to the conversation. Mm, um, I don't know if I feel a need to introduce any more than that. I felt like when we were just at summer camp and we were speaking, you and me and Francois, about some of these topics, that there was such a feeling of relief in me, like, you get it, and it's holy to you, and you're preparing, and that just made my heart feel so comfortable and safe, because I've gone through a lot of passages with death in the last many years, and it's it's great to have companions in the inquiry and in the movement towards embracing death.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah. It's wonderful to connect with others who's also looking at death and life from that perspective of walking with death,
Mm-hmm.
our
Mm-hmm.
companion. Hmm.
Yes. I feel that as a lot of the work that I've done over the years um, has been about people coming into deep connection with their own life force, their own sexuality, and opening their hearts and learning how to share that with other people. And on occasion, in some of the men's work that I've done, we've created initiations for moving into new passages and new chapters of life. And most of my focus has been on uh, boys moving into adulthood and younger men moving into marriage and family and relationship, and becoming happy members of society, contributing and not just consuming. So there's been a lot of focus on that end of life. And one of the wisdoms that I've noticed is in the indigenous cultures around these kinds of initiations, that there's such a different approach to death. So in these indigenous cultures, in the native traditions, there's so much awareness that death is a companion. Death is always present in the room. And I've come to see this as as coming from when we live on the land, when we live with the land of our ancestors, then it's literally the ground we're walking on is the bones of our ancestors. And so death is so much a part of this. And I'm not sure about you, but for me, like Americans move around every 10 years to different places. And so ancestors are something that we see photographs of in a photo album. And it's not something that is like a living part of the environment that we move through and we eat food from and we bury our dead in every day. It's that all happens far away. So I've been super aware of the differences between how traditional cultures live with death and how very modern cultures don't live with death. We like push it away to the hospitals and the assisted living homes. And, a lot of times now, most of the people I know are cremated rather than buried. And so even after they die, they've been through a dying process and there's a dead body, and all I see is a bag full of ashes. I remember when I was younger and we would go to funerals and you would see the body. I saw my grandmother's body lying in the casket, and it became real to me in such a way that, oh, she's not here. Like this body is still here, but my grandmother is gone. So it hit me in a very different way than when my sister died and she was cremated and we got a bag of ashes. And it's like, yeah, it's a concept. I realized these are the ashes of her body, but it wasn't as real to me as actually seeing a face. And so I feel we're more and more divorced from that realness of here is a body.
Okay, maybe I can just add that in Denmark we doesn't have the tradition of seeing the body in the coffin,
Hmm.
but we still have the tradition of having the coffin in the church and carrying it out of the church. And I remember the moment when you grab the coffin and you feel the weight of your dead mother or father.
Yeah.
Really, then it becomes very real.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we can see them when they're put into the coffin, but not everyone in the church. It's just the closest.
Mm-hmm.
The weight of the body, there's something about when it gets very real. I think.
Yes, yes. There's something about the physical that it just lands. I remember watching animals sometimes when an animal would die and some other like its siblings would come over and just sniff for a moment, like literally a few seconds, and then just like and walk away like they knew it was done. It just registers in the body as an ending. It's real.
Mm. Yeah, I've seen some amazing things with horses
Ah.
together and be there like they knew something was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Then when the horse they were looking at were dying, and they would just stand there for a while and then they would start to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And but our old dog would come and lie next to the dead body and not leave
Oh.
until it was taken away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They instantly know what's going on.
Yes, yes. And I feel like we've lost that instinctual connection
Yeah.
to death, which would make, which I don't know if I say like our bodies know how to deal with death
Mm.
because we've been dying for millions of years. So it's that, and our minds don't know how to deal with death. We keep trying to make it an abstraction, which means that we never come to completion. or closure with it. It just sort of gradually fades away because that person is no longer a part of our waking life. But it's different from the absolute end of this is a dead body and everything will be different now.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mm.
Hmm. Yeah, I really like also when you talk about this rite of passage and the initiations of life, because there are so many of these if we notice
Yes.
them,
Mhm.
and death is just the final one in flesh, but it's just
Mhm.
another rite of passage and another initiation to a new
Yes.
a new form of life, if you will. Yeah. And I think that if people were more used to engaging in all the rites of passages, death wouldn't be so scary either.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Because each rite of passage, each initiation brings us into our bodies in a new way. So, like, we have a more felt sense of reality, like, oh, now I am a woman, now I am a man, now I'm a mother. Now, like, all these things become real in our bodies, and the capacity of our bodies increases to hold more reality, to hold more realness and more love.
Mm.
So this is just the last passage. Yeah.
And it also allows us to actually mourn what we are letting go of, and just like dwell a bit with that has been, that we are now letting go of, and then be
Mhm.
becoming excited about what's awaiting. Even though
Yes.
it's unknown and new territory, there's some excitement that can come when we consciously enter. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yes. Yes. And that this brings to a new angle of this, that, we've been talking about the reality of a dead body, and I'd love to segue, like you just suggested, into the beauty and the grace of death, like not just as like, oh, here's a corpse, but like, what happens when someone is dying, what happens when we're dying, and what happens as death approaches and when death arrives, in terms of how are we initiated, what can open up inside our own hearts, in our own bodies, because of this. And for me, the greatest lesson or gift of being with death is the realization of love, like how much I've loved this person and how much they've meant to me and how much I'll miss them, and all that. It activates my heart and it opens my heart in a way that's easy to overlook when I'm like busy with daily life. It's like, sure, I know I love them and they know, they like, everybody knows that love is there. But when we drop into dying and death, there's such a silence and a stillness and a space that opens up as the dying person becomes less and less active. I remember when my mother was moving towards, in the last couple of years of her life, there were all these stages of like, her world was getting smaller and smaller. Like, the first shock I remember was she gave up her suitcase. It's like, I'm not going to be traveling anymore. And then she gave up her car. It's like, I'm not going to be driving anymore. And then it became like everyone who wanted to see her had to come to her home and visit. And then she stopped going outside and tending to her garden and the flowers. And then she was just sitting in the living room. It got smaller and smaller and stiller and stiller. And what happened then, I realized, like, the family would gather for holidays and Christmas and things like that, birthdays. And it was always a very big and noisy celebration with many people talking at once. But when it was like just my mother, sitting in her chair in the living room and just me, there were not those distractions. It's like we had the opportunity to connect more deeply and be more real, and there was nothing else to do. Like we couldn't even go for a walk around the block and look at this and look at that. It was just like we're just here, it's just the two of us, and your body is dying, and like, how do we want to face this? The realness that becomes available in that stillness, in that quiet, is more and more apparent as we get closer and closer to death.
It's a really good picture of all these layers peeling off and just become more and more simple and more real.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Simple and real.
Mm.
And this is what happens on the other end with a baby. Like when a baby comes in, it's like you're not all over the world. You're like just here with the baby, like on your body or in the little bed. And life is very simple. It's focused just in the home. The home is the container where all the magic happens.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Mm. And that's how we want it to be, both the beginning and the end. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
both ends are very noisy and not simple at all.
Yes.
That's when I feel that people like you and me and others who have seen that other side of life and death can really make a difference. Even if things are very noisy, can be that
Mm-hmm.
point to help the person transitioning in to find that place within themselves in the transition.
Yes. Yes.
Mm.
I feel for myself, I felt like in those situations, one of the biggest gifts that I brought was just speaking the truth.
Mm.
Speaking the truth to the one who was dying. So and the communion that happens just to say, yes, you're dying. Because so many times, especially in families, I noticed in my own family, like other people wanted to be, no, 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 you're not dying. Wait, there's one more thing that we can do, and this will help, and that will help, and you hold on longer, and all that.
Mm.
Just to be able to say you're dying, and I saw the relief on my mother's face, like, oh, someone finally gets it. And to
Yes.
be able to share with my siblings and my nieces and nephews, like, this is what's happening, and this is what's appropriate. This is how we can meet with grandma now in this space that she's in. Like, we have to be quiet, we have to go slow, we have to just speak from our hearts and say goodbye.
Mm. Yeah. It can be very difficult for people to say goodbye because we keep hoping we have more time, and we don't.
Yes.
If we don't say goodbye, then we will meet again.
Yes. Yes.
We don't know. And
Mhm.
ultimately, for me, having been with death and also felt how sudden it can just go into that place where there's no more words,
Mhm.
started living my life in a way that every time I part with a person, I prepare myself that I don't know if I will see them again. So
Yes.
is this how I want to leave them?
Hmm. Beautiful. Yes. This is some of the simplicity
Mm.
of death. Like, that's such a beautiful practice to every time you see someone to ask yourself, will I ever see them again? And what is left unsaid? Like, what do I still want to share while we do have time?
Yes.
And that helps to make everything very real and very distilled into its essence,
Mm.
not wasted. The time's not wasted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are some of the gifts that, like, I would like to pass on as an elder who is in an intimate relationship with death. It's like to speak with other people about how they can be in relationship with death too, like
Mm.
what they can do when someone else is dying to make the most of the time and the connection that's available.
Mm.
And I feel like that's also missing a lot, because so many people don't want to face that, don't want to say that last goodbye.
Mm.
But when we don't want to say that last goodbye, then we miss the completion and the closure. And what I've seen over and over again is that the moment that someone admits, this is the last time I will see you, the heart just cracks open. It's not even a crack, it blows open. And all the love that's been held inside just spills out.
Mm.
And it's such a blessing and a gift to just to be in the presence of that, just to feel that love together
Mm.
is like the final gift in both directions
Mm.
that I hate for people to miss,
Yeah.
because they're just afraid to say that final goodbye.
Mm. I just remember when my father passed away 6 months ago, one of his old friends came to say goodbye. And she was one of the only persons he felt he could receive. And she was so present and so aware that this is a goodbye. And I
Mm-hmm.
see how he lit up from that meeting. And yeah, it was such a gift that she came to say goodbye
Mm-hmm.
and not
Mm-hmm.
just encourage him to get well.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. Mm.
There's one tradition, I don't remember which one it is, but it's such a beautiful image. It's like the soul of the one who is dying is carried into the afterlife on the waves of our love.
Mm.
So, like, the more love that we bring into the process, the more beautifully and gracefully they are carried into the next realm. And I hold that sometimes. It's like when I feel like, oh, this is so hard to do, it's like the least I can do
Mm.
is show them the full extent of my love for them and of the impact that they've had on me, and hope that that like carries them with grace into the next world.
Yeah.
I would feel stingy and greedy if I held that back, because I didn't want to be an emotional wreck.
Mm. Yes. And that goes both for when you're sitting at the deathbed and also for the funeral. I've really
Yes.
been seeing and feeling those waves of love that a funeral can generate. And like, it's like the soul is still hovering, wanting
Mm-hmm.
to take that last goodbye. And when it's really met with a lot of loves and waves of love and celebration of their life, it's like they can just spread the wings.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. So, message to all of you who are reluctant to embrace death. These are some of the gifts of actually facing death and embracing the possibilities and the moments of grace that are available in between the things that are like really hard. It's hard to see someone we love suffer. it's hard to have to say goodbye over and over again. But there's blessings in that too, and they're well worth exploring.
Yeah. And also, as you say, oftentimes people know it soon. It's my time. If
Yes.
they have the luck to become old, they will know that my time is running out, and they're actually okay with it. And
Yes.
and then it's really important to remember that the grief is our own. We're not
Beautiful. Yes.
grieving for them. We're grieving for ourselves that we
Mhm.
will miss them when they move on. But we should really see if we can, yeah, make this distinction between our own grief and the support and love to send them on their journey and celebrate with them if they feel ready to move on.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. Yes.
Mm.
I, our own grief. Yeah, there's another thing too that I've heard, that grief is unexpressed love.
Mm.
Like however much love we didn't share with them is backed up inside of us as grief. And when we fully open to that and share that, the quality of grief changes for me, and it moves from kind of like a heartbreaking cry of like something's wrong. And when I let the grief spill out and go, it turns into this gentle stream of like bittersweet memories of all the love that we've shared.
Mm.
And it's not so gut-wrenching. It becomes something different when it's allowed to flow.
That's really beautiful. That's so right. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I really felt myself. I had 1 month with my father before he died, and I didn't know if he was gonna live or die. I just knew that I'm gonna give my all. And I really felt how so much healing happened in that month, in me and in him. So when he was going, there was such a completion in me, and I felt like I could have done nothing more. And that makes the griefs different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, what a great I don't know if goal is the right word, but to come to the place where we feel like I could have done nothing more. Like I did everything in my power.
Mm.
I shared everything. I spilled the last drop out. Yeah,
Yeah.
I emptied it. I emptied the wine bottle.
Mm. I'm curious in how you see the death process, because I know for many people it they have an idea that it looks very different. And I
Mhm.
also have my own experiences that it's actually colored by your beliefs and the fears and or acceptance you have when you enter it. Do you have
Mhm.
anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, that's a great one, because I do believe that, or I have experienced many times, that the attitude of the person who is dying completely colors the whole experience, to the point where I don't always like to talk about it this way, but it's almost like if you clench hard enough, you can manifest a painful, suffering death.
Mm.
And if you relax and surrender and let go enough, you're carried kind of with ease. And I love the image of like going down a river. It's like when we let go and we're just in the middle and let the current carry us, there's it becomes easier and more graceful. Even if there still is pain or suffering, there's a relaxing into it that changes the experience, changes the emotional experience, and I also see changes the physical experience.
Mm.
And I've seen people die in hospital, and I did get to be with my sister and my mother, both died at home in hospice. And I was with them for 3 or 4 months before each of them died. So I kind of got to be there watch them through the whole process. And the the beauty of having the time and the space and the support to surrender into the experience with the hospice was so different than being in the hospital, where they're interrupted every 30 minutes by someone coming in and poking something and checking something, and it's like there's no way to really relax and be with what's happening internally, because there's so much busyness and distraction and fear on the outside. Like my sister who died was a nurse, so I like really appreciate what nurses do and what they bring. And yet I have to say the difference between the nurses who are with the dying and the hospice workers who were with the dying, it was night and day. Because at the core, the nurses mostly felt afraid of you dying. Like their job was to stop you from dying. So every time they came into the room, they were tense and alert and looking for what was going wrong that could be corrected. And so there's that frantic energy of avoidance in the hospital. And then in the hospice, everyone was like, yes, you're going to die. It's inevitable. Here we are. What can we do to make you comfortable now? And that acceptance and that matter of fact or commonplace, like it's sort of like, yes, of course we're going to have dinner this evening. It's like, yes, of course you're going to die. And the beauty of like, we're here to make it as comfortable as possible for you and to give you space and time to catch up with yourself and to be engaged with this reality that's happening to you. And I noticed that from our work with intimacy and relationship, like what happens when two people get together and they're like, something's wrong, we have to fix it, something's wrong, we have to fix it. And when two people come together and create like spaciousness, like, oh, let's breathe together, let's co-regulate, let me hear what's really happening for you, let me share what's really happening for me. And something happens in that acceptance, in that spaciousness, that becomes a new creative possibility that's really, really sweet and precious. So I appreciate that, the relaxedness. And it's also nice to hear from like hospice workers who have been through this dozens of times or hundreds of times. It was very reassuring for me to learn that some of the things that were happening with my mother's body as she was in the last few days were kind of alarming to me. But then for them to explain, well, actually, her feet are turning blue and they're going numb because the blood isn't flowing in them anymore. And it doesn't hurt at all because the blood isn't flowing in them anymore. So she doesn't even feel them. And I was like, oh no, like what, we must do something about this. And no, and some of the breathing, the way that it changes and can be alarming and sound like someone's drowning. And it's not really, it's just like a little bit of fluid in the back of the throat. And every time the breath comes through, it stirs it up and sounds like, oh my God, the waves are coming and they're dying. They can't breathe. So to have realistic information about what the physical process is and what the emotional process is can be really helpful and really reassuring. And that's part of why I like to talk about this with people, because when I went into it, I was so misinformed and so frightened about suffering and wanting my loved one not to suffer, that it was great to get a reality check about what is and isn't suffering, and what can and can't be soothed with medication, so that there's just an ease to the bodily functions. That's I feel is a really important piece also, that helps us just be familiar, like on more familiar terms with dying. And I never got that in a hospital. Like I maybe your experience was different.
I would like to add something because I have had
Yes.
2 times where I had to be in the hospital with my dying parents, and there was no time to get to a hospice. So I just want to tell to the people who might get to experience that it's in the chaos of a hospital, that it's still possible to create a bubble and ask for, on behalf of your dying parent or whoever is dying, for the space and the privacy. We were lucky to get a 1 person room, and I would just be very strong on, okay,
Mhm.
he is dying, so stop taking tests. If we
Yes.
can't, you know, do we agree that he's dying? Yes.
Mhm.
So leave him alone. Just, I'll
Mhm.
call you if we need you. Otherwise, we'll just deal with this. And we had the
Beautiful.
space. But it takes, then you need to hold that space, but you can hold it anywhere
Mhm.
as long as you are at peace with what is happening.
Yes,
And
yes.
again, it's nice to have someone to ask, is this okay? I mean, is there something we should do, or should we just help him breathe through it?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, and I hear you about when we're advocating for someone who's dying, you have to be really strong. And in the United States, you also have to have the signed medical legal documents that allow them to back away and create time and space without intervention.
Yeah. Luckily, I got to speak to the doctor while my father could still speak, and he said,
Nice.
"I don't want any more treatment." Otherwise,
Mhm.
they wouldn't be allowed to stop it.
Yes. So that is important. That
Yeah.
is very important. Mhm.
Yeah.
Wow, I feel like we're covering such rich territory. I feel so um so companion with you in this in this inquiry. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And there's so much more. But I just would like to say, I know that you are also very familiar with the term death doula. And I
Hmm.
just find it interesting that there is a birth doula and a death doula. And as we spoke
Hmm.
about, it's the same kind of transition.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is the same. Yeah, it's so easy for me to just see it as, like you're on one side or the other side of the doorway.
Mm, yeah.
And I love the term doula, because what it means to me, what I've seen from people who are practicing in that field, is a commitment to support the natural process, to not make something happen or follow an ideal of when it's supposed to happen or how or any of that, but just to be there to like hold the container and hold the edges and make it easier for everyone.
Yeah.
um, and that's a beautiful position. I really love that. And I'd love to transition a bit here and speak to some of the other dyings that are in my heart, that are on my heart, that weigh on my heart, that I feel that I would love more fellowship and more companionship, more people sharing the process and the awareness with me. And some of this is like some of the larger dyings that are happening in our world. And for me, when we were talking in the very beginning about when it becomes real, when you see the dead body or feel the weight of the casket, this has happened to me with nature. and the natural world in ways that really penetrated my denial. And some of it's very dramatic. I lived in Sedona, Arizona for several years, and there was, because of the global warming, and not having really cold winters anymore, there was an infestation of bark beetles that came into the pine forests. And so in a couple of years, I would say 80% of the trees in the forest were dying. And you could just like go out and look at it and see death is happening in this forest. It's going. And I also love oceans, and I've seen this in coral reefs and places where I've gone snorkeling and scuba diving. Like in 20, 30, 40 years ago, I would go into the water and like I would be swarmed by fish. They were just like all over me. And now I go in and there's like a couple of fish over by a dead coral reef, and it's very barren and desert-like now. And some of the more rapid things, I was in California when some of the wildfires came through, and you just see that fire coming over the mountain and down and like taking out a whole town. It's like, here's death also. And I because of these experiences are made real to me, I started looking at the world more curiously and studying some of the scientific journals about what's the processes that are underway with the global warming and the ocean acidification and more mercury in the fish that are left, and like all these kinds of things. And it just became really clear to me that large parts of the natural world that I grew up with and loved are dying or dead. And there's something that I want to honor about that. Like in the same way that I wanted to sit with my mother and ease her through the dying process, not like we're going to save the coral reef or the forest is burnt to the ground, like maybe it'll come back in many years, but now it's gone. I just wanted to celebrate and memorialize that passage, and to feel my grief. And we've worked with the embodied intimacy and the trauma as being alone with too much. And for me, some of these like things, when like whole entire hillsides and thousands of hectares are burnt to the ground, to be with that alone is really, really difficult. And, I wonder about like who else sees this, who else feels that. And sometimes when it's a large, fast moving natural disaster, like a flood or a forest fire, there like a community is impacted and mourns together. But when it's like really, really slow moving, like the coral reefs and the ocean acidification, I feel like the young people who I meet who are going snorkeling, it's like they don't know how it was. Like I have that long view of many, many decades in the change. And I would just like to, I don't know if I want to create rituals so much as create awareness and coming together in what might open in our hearts, what might open in passageways to what's dying, to actually be real about it, and to share like, this is what you've meant to me, and I love you, and thank you for all the beauty and joy that we experienced together. And I want to be able to share that with other people. And sometimes, like at the summer camp, we had a conversation about like how death is showing up in your life. And I feel like there are some younger people now who are aware and pissed, angry, and scared about what's dying in the natural world, and what world they're going to be able to live in as human beings in 50 years. So I'm very curious about how can we bring all of the things we've been talking about, you and I, in this conversation, all of the beauty of being with death, and opening to death, and opening to grief, together, what might be able to happen if we turned our attention to some of the larger parts of the world, or society, or economies, or like there's all kinds of things that are obviously not doing well right now. And I'm very curious about how we can find the grace in that, rather than running away from it or avoiding it, or pretending like, well, I put my plastic bottles in the cans, so everything's going to be okay.
I really feel that there is some wisdom that we, especially the younger generations who might not even know about them, but some of the traditions that comes from smaller societies, uh, there is something there that we could really learn from. And
Mm,
there's two things that comes to mind. One thing is I was in Kauai 1998,
mhm,
and there had been a huge hurricane that had
mhm.
turned over many houses and trees and everything. And they were telling about how they know when it's coming, they know it's going to hit, and everyone is gathering and deciding how can we help each other when it comes.
Yes,
And we
yes.
don't know who it's going to hit, but we're here together. And I
Hmm.
just felt the beauty of how that brought more connection, knowing that destruction is coming. But how can we do this together? So that's like
Ah, yes, yes, yes.
not being alone with too much, because facing a hurricane on your own is really scary.
Hmm.
And the other part is like I've seen smaller eco villages where they have all generations and someone old is sick and dying, and how the whole community is just celebrating the life of that person. And it's such a natural thing, and everyone is taking care and bringing food and just holding it
Hmm.
together.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's something there that we need to learn from in, or that could be really helpful in facing that, yeah, things are dying, and
Hmm.
how can we stick together in that process. And we don't know where we'll go, but how can we be together around it?
Ah, I love that, Jimmy, and that's so beautiful too. It makes it so clear that it's a communal experience. It's a shared community experience of facing, here comes the destruction, or this is natural, someone old is moving on, and we're all facing it together. We're all in it together. And that's what my heart longs for when I look around the world and I see things that many people seem to be ignoring.
Mm.
And I long to be with people who also see it and feel it, and are coming together in a way that feels strong and beautiful.
Yeah.
And yeah, again, love opens up.
The big question is because people are either ignoring or being really fearful, because if they're watching all the news and everything is going down the drain, and that just creates more separation and fear and anxiety. So
Yes.
how can we have you got any ideas how we
This
can bring this into the bigger society?
this is the big question for me, because I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when I started really getting into the death doula portion, I was very aware of all those things that were going on and wanted to share. And then there was an overabundance of too much sharing, and people would like, oh, go into shock and freeze and fight and flight and all that. And I just got, I just kind of learned to be quiet again. It was like, oh, the world isn't ready. So I'm not going to ignore this, but I see how terrifying it is for many other people to face it. But I'm wondering, like, if there's a middle passage through here, not the denial and ignoring, and not the terror. And sometimes the terror I also see, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but the overactivism kind of reminds me of, oh, my mom is dying, but somebody wants to like put new drugs in her and like try to save her and all this. And it's like, I wonder if there's wisdom always in that. Sometimes, yes, but I feel in my heart, like what you were describing in Kauai, when a community comes together to face the destruction, that's actually more potent than trying to what do they call it now? Retrofit all the buildings so they'll survive the earthquake or the hurricane. It's like, that's beautiful too. And almost at this stage of like, we're so far along with so many things dying, I prefer to empower and open up. How do communities come together in love to support each other and share each other as these deaths are coming, arriving here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this conversation has been kind of the new approach that I'm trying, like to begin with the personal and to share the benefits and the blessings of accepting death when it comes. And then like when people are feeling that, like, oh, that's true, I feel that's real, I want to do it that way, then opening up to it's the same process. Like, how do we do this with, you know, a forest? How do we do this with something larger?
And maybe because it's such a overwhelming thing to try to change the whole world, but
Yes. Yeah.
maybe we just all need to be aware to not be alone with the grieving of your local forest, calling in
Nice.
local community and say, you know, we all lost this forest. Should we grieve it together and celebrate what good it brought us? And in that
Mhm.
way, creating a new culture around the losses in our life.
Yes, living with loss. Yes. I
Yeah.
love that. I love the way you just made it local and I would say manageable, but like I can imagine finding the friends of the forest,
Mm.
the ones who went hiking in it and camping and fishing and like bringing them together feels really beautiful.
Mm.
And yeah, again, I watched the stages of dying and the like people who are in the grief and the anger and the activism and the negotiation and all that. And it's like, oh, can we find, like, who can we find that the tiny little spot of people who are like, yes, it's true, let's be with it as it is,
With presence, not
with
trying to make.
presence. Yes. Yeah, that's I want more of that.
Mm, yes.
Mhm.
Ah,
Hmm.
wow, I love talking to you about this.
Me too. This is so rich. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, but maybe new opportunities and new ideas and new cultures will unfold themselves, and maybe there will be more to share in the future.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, we're certainly going to have a lot more practice with death and dying.
We really are.
Yeah.
Mm.
Mhm. Mhm.
And actually, I just want to bring in the beauty of whenever I have with small things in my personal life, that I have wanted to happen in a specific way, and having to realize that I have to let it go. It might never
Mhm.
happen. Now I'm really consciously letting it go. And then often it comes in a different way.
Mhm.
And I believe that if I didn't let it go, I would still have somehow prevented it from happening because I was so focused on it has to be this way or this
Yeah.
forest or this whatever it is. So there's some unknown gifts in really being able to let go of something that is dying to make room for the new, and we don't know what that is.
Mhm. Thank you so much for bringing it back to those everyday losses
Mm.
that we all experience. I have the same thing as what you just described, that when I take the time to actually admit this dream is dead, this project won't work, like, and to let it go, I see it sometimes as like compost. Like I'm disassembling all the pieces and throwing them back into the ground and letting something, let them feed something new. And almost always something new does come along that is not a form I would have imagined, because I was so fixated on, well, it needs to look like this, it needs to be that. But yeah, there's power in letting go. There's power in saying goodbye. There's power in opening up the floodgates of love for a new creation.
Mm. And just by taking the picture you opened with the when your mother was slowly dying, how life became more and more simple. I just have a feeling of this is what's happening to our world as we know it. We
Yes.
had this expansion, 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 and it's become more and more noisy and more things happening at the same time. And
Mm-hmm.
now things start falling away. The layers
Yes.
are peeling off, and sometimes that's really painful because we don't want that layer to be peeled off, but we are being forced back into simplicity.
Yes.
So that might also be one thing each of us can do in our own life, to just keep looking for that simplicity so life doesn't have to force it upon us. So it's not a struggle, instead of just surrendering to it and actually,
Yes.
because as we both have discovered, there's such a huge gift when we come to that simple place. So
Mm-hmm.
why not harvest that gifts while we're still alive, and
Oh.
yeah, surrendering to the simplicity.
Hmm. I
And
like that. Hmm. Keep it simple
Yeah.
and trust the flow, the ebb and flow of life and death.
Yeah. Mm. That feels like a really good sentence to land on. So I just want to say huge thank you for opening this conversation. It feels
Thank you.
so potent and important. And even though we're talking about death, this actually to me brings more life.
Yes, exactly. That's the secret.
Yes. Mm.
Facing death brings more life. Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me to come and share with you. I can't think of a better person to have this conversation with.
Thank
So beautiful to talk with you again, Jimmy.
you.